Barbershop refused to cut black boy's hair, but the mayor was watching. The morning sun spilled softly over the cracked pavement of Oak Ridge Street, painting the sleepy town in shades of gold. Malik Washington stood in front of the bathroom mirror, stretching on tiptoes to get a better look at himself. His curly black hair was wild and uneven, growing out in patches where he'd tried to trim it with safety scissors last week. Today, that would change. Today was haircut day. "Malik, you ready, baby?" His mom called from downstairs, her voice warm but hurried. "Coming!" he shouted back, grabbing his hoodie and bolting down the steps 2 at a time. Tanya Washington was already by the door, purse over her shoulder and keys in hand. She was still in her nursing scrubs, her name badge clipped slightly askew on her chest. She looked tired, but her smile for Malik was radiant. "You excited?" she asked, holding the door open for him. He nodded quickly. "Yeah. Everyone's gonna be dressed up tomorrow. I don't want to look like a mess." "You won't," she said, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "You're gonna look sharp, like a little congressman." They laughed together as they stepped out into the sunlight, walking toward her aging Toyota Corolla. Tomorrow was Malik's elementary school graduation, and she'd promised to make it special. No more rushed kitchen trims, no more drugstore, clippers. He was going to a real barbershop, Westwood Cuts, the most popular shop in town. Clean fades, sharp lineups, the whole 9 yards. She had even booked an appointment online days ago, or so she thought. Westwood Cuts stood proudly on the corner of Main and Lenox, its wide windows filled with photos of grinning boys and men sporting precise, stylish cuts. A red, white, and blue barber pole spun slowly outside the door, like a carousel in slow motion. As they approached, Malik's excitement bubbled. He imagined stepping into school tomorrow, classmates staring, teachers smiling. The bell above. The door jingled as they entered. The shop smelled of aftershave and talcum powder, with the low hum of electric clippers in the background. 3 chairs were filled with customers, white men and boys, each engaged in casual conversation with their barbers. At the counter stood a man in his 40s, stocky with salt and pepper hair and a thick mustache. His name tag read Rick. He glanced up as Tanya and Malik approached. "Hi there," Tanya said politely. "We're here for Malik's 2:30 appointment." "Tanya Washington?" Rick blinked. Sorry, ma'am. We don't have that on the schedule." Tanya frowned and pulled out her phone. "I booked online. Got the confirmation and everything." He gave a tight smile. "Yeah, well, sometimes the system messes up." "We're all booked up for the rest of the day." Malik looked around. There were 2 empty chairs, and a boy who had walked in after them was already being led to one. "But you just took that boy," Tanya said, gesturing toward the newcomer. Rick glanced at him. "He's a regular. His dad's a longtime customer. We always try to squeeze them in." "So you're saying there's no way you can squeeze my son in?" Rick's smile faded. "Sorry, ma'am. You'll have to try another time." For a few seconds, the world seemed to pause. Malik felt a hot rush to his face, his ears burning. The men in the chairs had gone quiet. One barber kept clipping, but his eyes flicked up, watching. Tanya stared at Rick, disbelief etched across her face. She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped herself. Malik could see it in her eyes, the anger she swallowed, the pride she bit down on. She glanced at him and took a slow breath. "Come on, Malik," she said softly. "Let's go." He followed her out, eyes fixed on the floor. The door closed behind them with a heavy jingle. They walked in silence for a block. Malik's hands clenched into fists in his pockets. "Was it 'cause of me?" he finally asked. Tanya stopped. She crouched down in front of him, brushing a hand over his cheek. "No, baby. It wasn't you. It was them." "But why?" Her eyes welled up for a moment, but she blinked it back. "Some people still don't see us the way they should, but that's their problem, not yours. You hear me?" He nodded slowly. They stood there on the corner, just mother and son against the backdrop of a town too used to looking away. What they didn't see was the figure watching from across the street. Inside a quiet coffee shop called Lennox Bean, a man sat at a window seat, stirring a cup of black coffee he hadn't touched. He wore a navy suit, pressed and neat, a silver pin on his lapel in the shape of the town seal. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes followed the boy and his mother as they disappeared around the corner. Mayor Edward Ramsey had seen enough. The steam from Edward Ramsey's coffee had long gone cold, but he hadn't moved. His gaze lingered on the sidewalk where Tanya and her son had just walked, their heads bowed, their pride dented by something far older and uglier than any haircut. He let out a quiet sigh, a sound full of weight and weariness. He knew that feeling. That walk. 40 years ago he had made that same walk, though his feet had been smaller, his shoulders less squared. Different street, different store, same shame. Back then, Oakridge had only one barber who would cut a black boy's hair, and even he would make you wait until all the white customers were done, even if you'd arrived first. That was the unspoken ul. Young Edward had learned it the hard way. He remembered the smell of the linoleum floor, the rusted fan spinning above, the stares from men who held their newspapers higher when his father led him inside. One Saturday afternoon, when he was about Malik's age, a barber told his father, "Sorry, can't cut that kind of hair today. Blades aren't right for it." Edward hadn't understood the lie back then, but he understood the hate. Now, decades later, he was mayor of the very town that had once made his skin feel like a burden. The irony did not make him smile. It made him tired. Edward leaned back, in his chair, rubbing a hand over his clean-shaven jaw. His reflection stared back at him in the window, salt and pepper hair, tired eyes, tailored suit. They saw the mayor, the polished public servant. But inside, he was still that boy sometimes. The one who stood quietly beside his father, pretending not to notice. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. A quick search for Westwood Cuts Plus complaints brought up more than he expected. A thread on a local forum. An archived Yelp review from 2 years ago. They told my nephew they were full, but 10 minutes later took 2 white kids who walked in off the street. Another from just 6 months ago. Won't say it outright, but you can feel it. If you're black, they treat you like a walk-in no matter what. There were more. Not enough to go viral, but enough to form a pattern. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes narrowing. He had options, of course. A press release, a quiet investigation, a phone call to the owner with a warning. But none of that would touch the core of the issue. This wasn't just about one boy and one haircut. This was about a culture, a comfort in exclusion. And most, dangerous of all, a silence that made it acceptable. He couldn't afford to be hasty. As mayor, he had to walk a tightrope. Too aggressive, and the town council would accuse him of playing identity politics. Too passive, and he'd be just another black man in power who forgot where he came from. Edward finished his cold coffee, in one gulp, and stood. He buttoned his jacket, slipped his phone back in his pocket, and walked out into the sunshine. He took the long way back to City Hall, letting his feet guide him through the old neighborhoods. The cracked sidewalks, the corner store still run by the same Korean couple, the boarded-up buildings that once housed jazz clubs and diners. He passed the elementary school he and Malik had both attended, decades apart, yet still shaped by the same undercurrents. At his office, he called for no appointments. Closed the door. Sat at his desk with a legal pad. He wrote 2 words at the top, Community Day. A simple name for what he had in mind. A public event. Something big, something loud, but not confrontational. Not at first. It would be framed around unity, pride, growth. Celebrating the future of Oakridge, he would invite schools, churches, local businesses. He would also invite Westwood Cuts. Let them come with their scissors and smiles. let them show face. He would invite young people to speak, give them a microphone, a stage, a spotlight, and he would invite Malik, not as a victim, but as a voice. Edward smiled for the first time that day. He would not yell. He would not accuse. He would not call out Rick or his barbers by name. He didn't need to. He would let the truth speak for itself. Let them feel what it's like when the whole town is watching. He picked up the phone and called his deputy. "We're putting together something for next month," he said calmly. "A day to celebrate our kids. I want it in the town square. I want music, food, and full media coverage." "Big budget?" the deputy asked. "Big heart," Edward replied. "After the call." He sat back, staring out the window at the skyline he had grown up beneath. The gears were turning now, slowly but inevitably. It wasn't revenge he wanted. It was revelation. A moment the town couldn't forget. Not this time. Not this boy, because 40 years ago, no one had watched for him. But this time, the mayor had been watching. Edward Ramsey moved with deliberate calm, but his mind was a whirlwind of plans and intentions. A week after the quiet moment in Lenox, Bean Cafe, his idea had begun to take shape, no longer just a notion scribbled on a legal pad, but a full-scale community celebration. He named it Pride in Diversity, a day for all Oak Ridge. The name alone would draw smiles. It was safe, agreeable, broad enough to draw everyone in without raising alarm. But beneath it, Rick was hesitant at first. He didn't like crowds, but the more he thought about it, the more he saw a chance to smooth things over. Not that he admitted any wrongdoing, of course, just good PR. Maybe show the town that his shop was open to everyone. Maybe post a photo or two with kids of color to keep the online reviews in check. "We're in," he said by the end of the call. "We'll bring our mobile barber setup, do some free cuts for the kids. Tell the mayor we appreciate." The invite, the staffer relayed the message. Edward simply nodded, folding his hands. "Good," he said softly. "Let them come." Meanwhile, across town, in a modest two-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, Malik was at the kitchen table, head bent over a notebook. He was writing. His mother, Tanya, stood near the stove, glancing over every few minutes with both pride and concern. When the letter had arrived, signed with the mayor's seal and delivered in person, she'd been hesitant. It had been Edward himself who knocked on their door. He hadn't come with reporters or cameras, just a simple folder and a calm demeanor. He remembered Tanya from high school, though they hadn't run in the same circles. But he remembered her father and how hard he'd worked at the post office. He spoke to her respectfully, explained the event clearly, and never once used words like racism or injustice. "I'd like your son to say a few words," Edward had said. Just something short, about what Oak Ridge means to him, about growing up here. Tanya had narrowed her eyes. "Is this about what happened at the barbershop?" Edward had smiled faintly. "It's about who's watching, and who's never been watched before." Tanya didn't fully understand what he meant, but the steadiness in his eyes convinced her. She asked for a day to think. Then she said yes, and now Malik sat, chewing his pencil, trying to think of how to describe a town that sometimes smiled and sometimes looked away. "What do you want to say?" Tanya asked gently, drying her hands on a dish towel. "I don't." "No," Malik muttered. "That I like the library. That Ms. Harmon lets me take out more books than the limit. That I like the park. But I hate when the ice cream truck stops early on my street and keeps going when it's white kids waiting." Tanya raised an eyebrow. "You could say that, maybe in your own words." Malik looked up. "Is it supposed to be happy?" "It's supposed to be honest," she said. "But you can be honest and hopeful at the same time." He nodded, scribbling again. Edward watched the preparations unfold like chess pieces moving into place. City Hall buzzed with excitement. The local paper ran a front-page story. Oak Ridge to host inaugural Pride in Diversity Day. A major county news outlet picked up the live stream announcement. Sponsors lined up, and schools submitted their performers. But what gave Edward the most satisfaction was how naturally it all came together. No accusations, no protests. Just a platform, subtle but firm, for truth to rise. A week before the event, he asked to see Malik's speech. It was 3 paragraphs, messy handwriting, full of little spelling mistakes. But when Edward read it, something clenched in his chest. It said, "My name is Malik Washington. I am 12 years old and I am graduating this week. I like reading and drawing and space stuff. One day I want to build rockets or invent something important. I think Oak Ridge is a good place because we have trees and my grandma lives here and the school has nice teachers. But sometimes people don't look at me right. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong. I want to say that I'm still part of this town. I don't care what anyone thinks. I belong here. My friends belong here. We're the future of this place. Thank you for letting me speak." Edward folded the paper carefully and put it back in the envelope. He made no edits, no changes. It was perfect. Malik would read it as just a speech, but the town would hear it as something else entirely. The last line rang in Edward's mind. We're the future of this place. Yes, they were. And in just a few days, the whole town would hear it while Westwood Cuts stood in the crowd, smiling for the cameras, not realizing the spotlight was already set to burn. The morning sun rose gently over Oak Ridge, casting golden light across the town square. Banners flapped in the breeze. Pride in diversity, a day for all Oak Ridge. Booths lined the sidewalks. Laughter echoed from the bouncy house. Kids painted each other's faces, and the smell of grilled food wafted through the air. By 10 a.m., the crowd had tripled. Local news vans circled the perimeter. Camera crews adjusted their lenses. The mayor's team had done their work well. Every corner of the square buzzed with activity, music, and pride. But the true center of it all was the small wooden stage under the old oak tree in the plaza's heart. Westwood Cuts had set up their booth near the stage, eye-catching and sleek. Their red and white striped tent offered free cuts to children. Barbers in crisp aprons moved efficiently, their smiles wide for the crowd and the cameras. Rick, the owner, wore a button-down polo and dark sunglasses. He posed with kids, snapped photos with parents, and handed out branded combs. A few passers-by thanked him. Others merely nodded. He felt the eyes on him, but brushed them off. This was good press. Redemption even, though he'd never admit. He needed it. He had no idea what was coming. At noon, the crowd quieted. The music faded. Edward Ramsey took the stage, greeted by warm applause. He spoke for a few minutes, gracious, charismatic, careful. He praised the town's growth, the businesses that gave back, and the young voices that represented the town's future. Then, he stepped aside. "And now," Edward said, his voice steady, "please welcome a young man who reminds us all of where we've been and where we must go. Malik Washington." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some clapped, others leaned forward. Malik stepped onto the stage slowly, his Sunday shoes tapping nervously on the wood. His suit was a little too big, the collar slightly askew, but his back was straight. He clutched a folded paper in both hands. He stared out at the sea of faces. So many. His voice trembled as he began. "My name is Malik Washington. I'm 12 years old and I'm graduating this week. I like books and rockets and art. One day I want to invent something that helps people." The crowd smiled. A few phones rose. Malik swallowed hard. His hands shook. 2 weeks ago, my mom took me to get a haircut for graduation. We went to a nice place downtown. I was really excited. But when we walked in, they told us they were full. But then they took someone else, someone who didn't look like me. A hush swept across the square like wind through tall grass. Malik looked up. His voice found its strength. I didn't understand what I did wrong. I didn't say anything bad. I just stood there. But I felt like I didn't belong in my own town. Rick's smile froze. His sunglasses couldn't hide the way his jaw tightened. The cameras turned toward his booth. Slowly, Malik kept reading. But my mom said I do belong, and the mayor told me I do too. So I'm here to say it out loud. I belong in Oak Ridge. Kids like me do, all of us. The crowd stood still. Then someone began to clap. Another joined. Then more. And as the applause began to swell, Edward stepped forward again. He placed a hand gently on Malik's shoulder. Then he turned to the crowd, raising his voice just enough. I was once that boy, he said. 40 years ago, I stood outside a shop just like that. I know that feeling, that silence, that shame. He looked toward the Westwood Cuts booth. The cameras followed. But today, he continued, we don't stay silent. Not anymore. A wave of applause erupted, strong, rising like thunder. Rick shifted uncomfortably. Some of the barbers behind him had stopped cutting. One looked down. Another, a young Latino man named Julio, stepped away from the chair and walked toward the stage. He spoke into a nearby microphone. I wasn't there that day, Julio said. But I work at that shop. And I want to say, I'm sorry. That's not who I want to be a part of. That's not who we should be. The crowd clapped again, cameras zoomed in on his face. He nodded at Malik. You belong here, kid. Another barber, a black woman named Charisse, followed him. Some of us tried to speak up before, she said. But it didn't go anywhere. Today it does. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Malik. Rick took a step back. His booth now seemed small, surrounded by eyes and questions. A reporter approached. Mr. Rick, do you have a comment? Rick tried to wave it off. It's not like that, he muttered. People take things the wrong way. But another reporter pushed a microphone closer. Why was this boy denied service that day? Can you explain the policy? Rick's throat worked, but no sound came out. Back on stage, Edward raised his voice one last time. Let today mark a turning point, he said. Let it be the day Oak Ridge stood together, not with slogans, not with silence, but with truth. The roar of applause followed him as he stepped down, guiding Malik off stage. Tanya rushed forward and hugged her son tight, tears streaming down her face. Behind them, phones lit up with live streams. Comments flooded in. Powerful. That boy is braver than most adults I know. Westwood Cuts has explaining to do. Within hours, the footage would spread through social media. By evening, the mayor's office would receive dozens of calls, some praising, some demanding answers. By morning, the town council would announce a civil investigation into business discrimination practices in Oak Ridge. But none of that mattered to Malik, who stood in the arms of his mother, unsure of what he had just started, but knowing at last that he had been heard. 1 week later, the name Westwood Cuts no longer brought thoughts of sleek fades or clean shaves. Instead, it echoed with shame across Oak Ridge. A viral video, Malik's speech, Edward's embrace, the barber's public apologies, had swept through social media. Thousands of shares, tens of thousands of comments. The town had become a talking point on national morning shows and evening panels alike. And in the heart of Oak Ridge, the barbershop that once prided itself on exclusivity now stood almost empty. On a sunny Saturday morning, the windows of Westwood Cuts were streaked with sunlight and dust. A printed apology had been taped to the glass door, typed neatly, and signed by Rick himself. We recognize the pain caused. We were wrong. We are listening now. But few people listened back. The shop lost over half its clientele. 2 employees had quit. One was Julio, who now volunteered at youth centers on weekends, cutting kids' hair in church basements. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, another barbershop buzzed with life. True Style, a modest storefront painted with bold colors and a sign that read, "Where every head matters." Inside, laughter and music filled the air. A long line of kids waited patiently, many accompanied by proud parents. And at the center of it all sat Malik, grinning nervously in the big leather chair. The owner, Marcus Big M. Henderson, stood behind him with clippers humming. "All right, young king," Big M said. "How we doing this? Clean fade? Edge tight? Gotta have you ready for that graduation, right?" Malik nodded, biting back a smile. "Just make me look sharp." "You got it." Big M worked with calm confidence, each pass of the clippers rhythmic and sure. As he trimmed, he told jokes, talked about the town, and treated Malik like someone who belonged, not a client, a neighbor, a kid with worth. When he finished, he spun Malik around toward the mirror. "There. See that? That's a future leader. Right there." Malik stared at his reflection. Crisp lines, even edges. But it wasn't just the haircut, it was the way he felt. Seen. "Looks good," he said softly. Big M clapped him on the shoulder. "Come by any time, Malik. Free cuts for life, my man. You earned that." Across town, Mayor Edward Ramsey sat behind his office desk, a pen in hand, reading over a new proposal. The title at the top of the page read, "Voices of Change Initiative." The idea had come to him right after the speech, after watching Malik stand firm, trembling but unshaken, in front of a crowd of strangers and doubters. That kind of courage deserved more than applause. It deserved opportunity. The program would start with 5 scholarships for students in Oak Ridge who had experienced discrimination. Over time, he hoped to grow it into mentorships, internships, even youth leadership summits. Edward signed his name at the bottom and leaned back. Change had begun. And it wasn't just about one barbershop. It was about every classroom where a child was silenced, every office where someone was overlooked, every town where a voice waited to be heard. Graduation day arrived with blue skies and camera flashes. Tanya dressed Malik in a new suit. This one fitted just right. He walked the stage with pride, shaking hands, holding his diploma with both hands. That night, back home, he stood in the bathroom in front of the mirror. He studied his haircut. Fresh, clean, tight. His eyes wandered to the reflection of his mother behind him, watching with a smile. He smiled back. It wasn't just about the hair. It was the way his heart felt. Lighter, stronger. He touched the side of his head, then looked into his own eyes and whispered, "I belong." And as the mirror held his gaze, the last words of his graduation speech echoed in his mind. Words he hadn't written, but ones he now understood. A haircut doesn't make a man. But the way we treat each other, that can change a generation. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, share it. And remember, small acts of respect can spark big change. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and keep standing up for what's right.